Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Welcome to Big Blend Radio with Nancy and Lisa, the Big Blend mother-daughter travel team and publishers of Big Blend magazines. On today's show, we're excited to have Rita Dragonette to join us to discuss her compelling debut novel, The 14th of September, and it shares a female-focused Vietnam-era story, a time when coming of age meant coming of conscience. Now, Nancy, that's what you read the book?
Yes, I did.
And that whole part of coming of conscience, that's a big deal at that time frame.
It very much reminds me of my childhood.
Okay.
You know, and just for the first time being really aware about politics.
Everybody, you can go to Rita's website. It's author-rita-dragonette.com. It is out now. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, all those great places. But I always encourage everyone to go directly to the author's website. You can connect with them, see what kind of book parties are going on, because apparently she likes to, get together with people and have like literary parties.
Yeah, I read that, and I think that's really cool. I like that idea.
So let's have a party now.
Yeah.
Welcome, Rita.
There
How
we
are
go.
you?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm excited to be here. We'll just pretend it's one of my literary salons, which is my party.
This is so cool. So I want to talk to you about, number one, this is your debut novel, but I know that you've been in the world of PR, which means we all have to learn how to write. So there's always a challenge in that too. Why you got interested in writing a novel, and then why this topic and that era. But did these parties, I'm calling them parties, literary salons, did that help you in the writing process? Is this something you've done for a long time?
Well, what I ended up doing is I think that I'm sort of a natural connector of people. And I had a friend about 10 years ago who had written a novel, but actually had never been to a book reading, which was amazing to me. And I said, well, you need to do this. It's important. People want to hear what you're writing about. So what I did is I brought a small group of avid readers into my living room, and I allowed her to, I offered her the ability to really introduce herself, talk about her book, and read from it in a very protected environment. And we had these fabulous discussions that came off of it. And everyone said, let's keep doing this. This is wonderful. So now about twice a year, what I do is I find authors that I fall in love with. And then I have this trusted group of people that sort of look at me and say, what have you got now? And bring them in, and it's wine and cheese and the most intimate interaction that you can have with an author. It's not like even in a bookstore where it's wonderful and you can ask questions. This is just, you can get toe to toe with somebody, and they're just great, and I'm addicted to them now. So
I like that.
I think, in the virtual age, Nancy and I were just talking about this yesterday, actually, that, we're throwing this crazy coast-to-coast cocktail tasting, judging panel judges happening at the same time in two different cocktail bars in two different places all at the same time. And it's looking for a signature cocktail for the band The Cravens. And this just funny, and we were like, this is so cool. We're doing a lot of online. We do radio shows with them and all this stuff. And then now it's in the flesh, but in two different places. Like, we're having this party, and on one side they're having their party, and we're connecting virtually. But we feel like in this age of all this digital technological ways of connecting, which is very cool, the one thing we're lacking is just actually sitting together with people and having a good conversation like that, and being introduced to something new. That going out and having kind of an intimate discussion is important. Sometimes it's always these huge events, but something intimate is good.
Exactly. And if you remember how we all first started telling stories, they were oral, they were around fires, and they sort of grew from there. And that's kind of what happens at the salon, is that they think it's going to be formal, but the author relaxes, the audience relaxes, and it's just like, hey, we're just having a beer at the bar. And the conversations we get into are phenomenal. We had one about entrapment that went on for 45 minutes. You know.
Wow.
Of course, we had a lot of lawyers in the audience, but it's things like that, you know, the issues that come up off of the book that we're reading. And I do mostly fiction, sometimes memoir. I've had 2 that were poetry that were incredibly well received by people who did not think they'd be interested. So it's opening the world. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Now, 14th of September, of course, I'm going to ask, okay, the 14th of September, what happened on that date? Why is that the book title? But tell us about why you decided to write a novel. Is that something you've always wanted to do? And was this something that you had at, the bottom of your drawer that you kind of snuck out once in a while and said, okay, I'm going to write another sentence throughout your life? Or how did this come to be?
I was always a big reader, but I also loved stories. I loved the movies. I loved anything that had a plot or a story. And my mother was a reader, and every time we got sick when we were kids, she would bring books home. And I was a big fantasizer, so I would constantly sort of have these daydreams where I would put myself in, say, a historical fiction novel, and then sort of spin out in my head how that would be. So therefore, there was nothing better than the idea to basically write that down. And it became my avocation. It was always my avocation. And I got into public relations because it's a writing field, and then I got into it, and it turned out that I was really good at this thing called strategy and business. But at the back of my head, I was still always a writer. It's the language that I was drawn to be able to communicate. So definitely, I wanted to tell a big rip-roaring novel with an important theme, but really involved characters. And then because I had been on campus during the time frame of one of the worst years of the Vietnam War, end of 69, early 70, those incidents, I remember even when they happened at the time, that, this was very significant. It's significant for my generation. These are things I need to remember. So if I was going to write, that was the first thing I was going to write about. And when I started taking classes, I basically used every workshop, every submission for everything as a scene in my eventual novel. So it's been with me for a very long time.
Wow. I like it because it just, like I said in the beginning, it reminded me of when I was growing up, and I just remember being so shocked when a line of kids at recess time formed like a conga line, and they had poster at the beginning of the line, and they were going, Nixon, Nixon, he's our man. And I was sort of, what?
He's our man. Oh dear.
Yeah, that he's our man. And I was like, what? Because I couldn't believe that we were having a political rally in our school.
Well, you were still in grammar school, right?
No, I was in high school.
Yeah, but it still does sound. I think the things that we had when I was still in high school had to do with keeping the cafeteria open late, or not having to wear dresses, things like that. But as the war progressed, we just all got more radical about what was important.
Yeah, it was just a real switch turn. All of a sudden, like it just seemed that one day everything was fine, and the next day it so wasn't. But that's just my personal
kind of like
on it.
I think sometimes that happens, especially if you're in high school. But it's a little different. But then it seems like things like this, with Vietnam and the war, and all of a sudden, here comes the draft. That things like that happen so fast. It's like a jolt. And in writing 14th of September, didn't you feel that as well? That's this. You had this all happened so fast for everybody.
Well, and I remember when things started to get pretty murky when I was a senior in high school. That was 1968, that horrible year of assassinations and Tet offensives and things like that. But I would have to say that my freshman year was still sort of, the old sorority fraternity things. But almost immediately, sophomore year, which is the year that I'm talking about in this book, like you said, it was almost between week to week. It was just suddenly there was something that happened in the news or whatever it was, but suddenly everybody was talking about this. I actually believe it was when they started to talk about the fact that they were going to be doing the lottery, and that the lottery was just such a terrifying prospect when you're on campus and most of the people are the age that are going to be pulled into the lottery and plucked to go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
So the terror and everything, and that's what I think made it turn like on a dime.
I was raised in South Africa, and so when I was in high school, half, all the men had to, young men, had to go to military. It was mandatory. You had to go for 2 years and serve.
Like Israel.
Yeah, very, very similar. The women did not, and in Israel the women do. I don't know if it's the same length of time as the men, but we have a chef on our show all the time, and she talks about that, having to serve, and she actually said she learned a lot from it. But you're not necessarily going to war. However, in South Africa at the time of when we graduated, some of my friends my boyfriend ended up actually contemplating suicide because he was not a person to know how to handle guns. It just wasn't. He was addicted to Bob Marley. So going suddenly and having to do this literally almost killed him. It took the wind out of his sails. I remember that. And then suddenly, because of the political changes that were going on in Angola, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, and even over in Namibia, things just got crazy. And next thing you know, everybody that was there for mandatory training for 2 years were now on the front lines and handling riots. And it was just, there's nothing, you feel helpless. There's nothing you can do but put together packages. And then people change when they come home. He wasn't who I fell in love with, and we didn't last after that because so for the woman at home, it was a horrible time because you were just stressed out all the time. You had no idea where they were they safe, so.
Well, and I think that's such a remarkable insight because one of the things I've always been interested in is the impact of war through women, because you're not on the front line, or at least up until recently, you have not been on the front line, but it trickles all through the family. And we read lots of books where it's the impact of war on a son from a father, that kind of a thing. But I think it's extremely profound, however different, and sometimes even more frustrating if you're a woman, which is pretty much the theme of the 14th of September as well, which is that I really wanted to focus on a time that most people associate with men, right? It was Vietnam, you were going off to war, and yet on this front of the campus, the women were dealing with all of this fear and anxiety, and you use all of these emotions, everything from, feeling guilty that you're not going to be on the front line. So a lot of the activities were put together by women. When the lottery hit and all the drugs and everything came in because everybody was so frightened, here you were, and you're nursing people through bad trips and you're trying to answer their questions when they are doing all this risky behavior like not eating so they don't pass their physical, because it was really a matter of life and death at that time. And they would say things to you like, what difference does it make if I die in a jungle or I die here? And you felt like you had to have a reason for them not to do that. It was, so as much as we felt pretty disenfranchised, because at any time a guy could also turn around and say, what's the big deal for you? You don't have to go. But you still feel like you were absolutely in it because you felt like you were on a battlefield. And I thought it was extremely important to tell that story. It has not been told yet. And that's what the 14th of September is about. And you asked me earlier what the date meant.
Yeah.
And what happened on the 14th of September is that if you were the draft lottery, the first draft lottery was in 1969 in December. And it was it was a lottery where they would pull birth dates. And if your birth date was that day, you became the number of whenever they pulled it. So if your birthday was this and that was number 1, you would go first. And then they would do it second, and they would do 365 of these. And it was to determine the order in which people would be called up. And it was kind of like a game show. I mean, they literally had it on television, and there were little blue balls with birth dates on them. Well, the birth date that was pulled that was number 1 was the September 14th. And so if that was your birthday, you'd be number 1 to go once your deferments were gone. And at the time of this lottery, December 1st, 1969, the life expectancy, they published things like this, the life expectancy under fire in Vietnam was 6 seconds. So it felt like a death sentence. So if you've ever seen the movie The Deer Hunter, you know, when they do the Russian roulette, that was a metaphor for Vietnam. It was, you know, you pull the number and you die. Now, by making this a woman's story, that is also my protagonist, Judy Talton's birthday. So it's another way to say, with the flip of the chromosome coin, this could have been me. This could have been us, the women. We're all in it together. Nothing is really different.
As I recall, if a young girl wanted to go into the service at that time, you had to get your parents' signature up until the age of 25, which is really different than for guys.
Well, at that time, actually, women were not in combat. So the women that went to Vietnam were primarily nurses.
Yeah.
There may have been a WAC component or something like that. You didn't have to be 25 to be a nurse. I'm not actually familiar with that. But there wasn't any combat position like there is today.
Right.
You know, when you're doing that. So, which is one of the reasons why I believe there haven't been as many stories written about or by women relative to Vietnam, other than some memoirs of nurses that have been in Vietnam, and then home front stories.
It's interesting because when Nancy started reading the 14th of September, she kept coming out. We have our wine time conversations, and she's like, oh man, I remember this, I remember that. And it's like going back in your memories. And I think that's interesting too, because everyone does have a different memory of this era. I mean, it's going to happen anywhere with anything in life. And it's different where everybody was, you know, how things were adopted, you know, how people felt. But I think this is something, isn't it something nationally that, you know, everybody is like, oh no, I don't want my brother going out there, you know.
I don't think most of us even understood why we were, you know, in Vietnam. All I remember about why we were in Vietnam, it had something to do with a treaty we had with France. And do you
remember the domino theory? Does that sound? Okay, so it was kind of like that. I think you've gotten right to the core of the real issue that we were dealing with in the anti-war movement, is that there was no clear reason for being in Vietnam, for us being in Vietnam. Exactly. France was there first, yes, but still there was no clear reason for it. And to tell you the truth, have you seen the Ken Burns documentary, The Vietnam War? All right, I think every American needs to see that. And he put that together finally, I think, very well, which is, you know, we came out of World War II and we had cured the world of fascism, and we were afraid that communism was going to be the same thing. We had the experience in Korea. We learned how to cut a country in half. It's brewing down in Vietnam. We have to stop the domino theory. We have to stop communism from getting down into Southeast Asia, because then it could go everywhere. But then that became much less of an objective, and then it just ended up very much that, you know, this war didn't have a clear objective. We didn't know who our enemy was. It's going on, but the United States had never lost a war, and we were not going to do it here. And that ended up what it was. And I thought Ken Burns did it very well at the end in that last segment, where it was just, did things change at the end of the war? And there was nothing that was different, except all these thousands of young men had died on either side.
Yeah, and I think there's so many things to it, that it just seemed like the biggest waste, the biggest
Absolutely.
waste.
Well, and that's why the wall is such a beautiful monument. The statues you have from other wars have gallant men, Iwo Jima putting flags into mountains and things. This wall is just about what this war was about. It's simply the names of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
There was not glory. It was not, and it has nothing to do with who fought it. I always like to say, the people who fought that war rocked, but the war itself totally sucked. And continues continues through this day to suck because the ramifications of it have worked its way through every generation, everything.
Well, there's things like Agent Orange where people are still sick because it stays in. It's like if it skips generations of it's like if your father was in Vietnam, you may not get it, but he'll pass it on to his wife, and it will go to your daughter or son.
Yeah,
that you give
I didn't even realize that. But it
keeps going, and it started in the Korean War. So we got Agent Orange and all these things that people, are still sick over, and it passes down through generations because it messes with your DNA, and there's that whole side of it. So the ramifications. I think war. Once a family has been in war, it stays with you.
Well, when you use chemical weapons,
pardon?
That's going to affect everybody at some point in their life somehow because it gets in the air and the water, and it's morally a disaster, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that at the bottom line of all of this is war is a horrible, inhumane thing that should be avoided at all costs.
Exactly.
Terrible things happen. I say this as the daughter of two veterans. I mean, my mother actually saw more action than my father in World War II. But it's a horrible thing. And so if we go into it, we have to be extremely clear. You've heard this from generals before about why that's necessary, and there is no other alternative. And then once we're in it, that was the lesson of Vietnam. Once we're in it, if we decide that this no longer makes sense for the price we're paying, we need to be able to be realistic and get out and not worry about old guidelines of bravado. Just admit your mistake and get out. But you can talk about Vietnam forever. It is just such a rich and sad topic. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of these other angles of the story never get told, like the woman's angle.
And that's I was going to ask you. Let's talk about, because as Private First Class Judy Tolton, going through something, as a young woman, but private. She's a private. So let's talk about that. And because this is really, it's her story, and you're and at that age, and 19 years old, you're at that age where you're discovering who you are, but then at the same time, this is going a little bit more than, do I want to go backpacking in Europe?
Well, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Maybe it's useful at this point to just sort of recap the story a little bit for the listeners. So the story is actually about Judy Tolton, and she is in college on a military scholarship, which is why she's a private first class. And she's there and it's the only way that she could go to school was through this military scholarship. She comes from a lower middle class family. Her father thinks she should be a secretary. She wants more out of her life. This is the only way she can possibly do it. And she's bargained with her through freshman year, Tet Offensive and Democratic Convention and all these different things. But come September of '69, as she starts her sophomore year, she's been having doubts about both the war itself and her role in it. And she's wondering if by taking their scholarship money, is she complicit? And she realizes she's only heard one side of the story. So she celebrates her 19th birthday on the 14th of September by going to the student union and sitting for the first time on the freak side of the of the Union instead of the Greek side. And the freak side is where all the anti-war protesters are. But she secretly goes into this. She does not tell them that she is in the Army. Her intention is to find out how they think so she can find out how she thinks. By doing this, she puts in jeopardy her scholarship, her relationship with her military family, her entire future as she knows it, including if the Army finds out, they could actually throw her in jail. If the counterculture finds out, this anti-war group that she's joined, if the counterculture finds out she's in the Army, they'll think she's a spy. So there are many things that she's sort of acting undercover. And then suddenly the lottery comes and she realizes that if she had been a man, she would be number one. And she is sort of plunged into, not sort of, she's plunged into this journey of self-discovery that goes through the events of the time, the moratorium, the lottery, through Kent State. And she ultimately has to make a decision, a life-altering decision that is as fateful as that of any lottery draftee. And my whole intention was to pose a dilemma, a female dilemma, that was as equivalent as possible to what the guys went through at that time. So with Judy, everything but her life is on the line. And I call it a female equivalent of the decision to go to Canada during those days, which is a kind of death. You know, you have to give up your life, your family, and everything that you end up doing. And a draftee, if they got a low lottery number, that's what they were thinking of. Do I go to Vietnam and risk getting killed for a war I do not believe in, or do I go to Canada and give up everything I know about the life that I have? I'll be alive, but I have to give up everything else. So the 14th of September is a female dilemma, has the same emotional intensity as that kind of a decision, because I feel very strongly that, again, women were on the line as much as men were. It just hasn't been appreciated.
I think it's fascinating about her even, you know, getting that scholarship. And also, it just shows that power of, let me go and see the other side. Let me go see so I can make an informed decision. And while that puts her in danger, I think about now how people, I mean, you could look at what's going on now in you know, politics and wars around the country, and I mean around the world, and people getting stuck on the same channel, not just the news channel, but stuck on the same path, where I find that to be a very dangerous place when you think in this tunnel vision. And I think that's the other thing with women. We have these, it's just, you know, our genes are we think in different ways. You know, we multitask more, right? There's this whole different, we're different than men.
Look for broader solutions to problems, right?
Yeah. I'm not going against men at all. It's just, is, they've got qualities we don't have, and we have qualities they don't have, but there is that side. And I think that's so important that she went and did that, because that gives another thing, just of like, if people did that now, we may have a little bit more peace in the world. If people saw the other side instead of just going, that's it, everybody's this way, this black and white perspective where there's no gray area, because life is where the gray area is.
Well, and you should freeze those comments in time and make a banner out of them, because that's exactly what the situation is. And that is what, to answer your early question, what coming of conscience means. The reason that, what a coming of conscience moment is one in which integrity trumps consequences. And it has everything to do with character. And that's my phrase. That hasn't been used before, but it comes off of coming of age. And you could easily say that this story, and I think it actually has a merit for it, this is not just a boomer book. This is a book about a 19-year-old girl. And coming of age is typically when a young person has some experience from which they learn. It's usually daunting, and after that, they're better equipped to become an adult. With coming of conscience, Judy has all of that, But the dilemma that she's going through mirrors the dilemma that the country is going through. So and she is convinced, as you know, teenagers are very serious, she's convinced that whatever decision she makes will define her character for the rest of her life. Just as the country is worried that whatever decision we make will define us forever. You know, do we cut and run in Vietnam? Do we stay? Do we do all these different things? There are really good reasons on both sides. You can make a case at any moment for what Judy should or should not do, just like you could the country. So coming of conscience is it's almost a rallying cry, you know, for activism and to do exactly what you said, which is really examine what you're doing in your life and for your life. I mean, I wish a very famous coming of conscience moment is when the two guys, I can't remember their names exactly, that's terrible. During the Nixon administration, there were two people in a row that refused to fire Archibald Cox, who was running the Watergate. It was called the Saturday Night Massacre. And they resigned rather than do something they knew that was wrong. That's the ultimate coming of conscience moment, you know. But a coming of conscience moment could go the other way. You know, I wish Mitch McConnell would have a coming of conscience moment and be responsible about our president. But on the other hand, I look at Paul Ryan and I think maybe your coming of conscience moment would not be to quit, but to stay. You know, you have to just think about all these. And the country is in a huge coming of conscience dilemma right now, which I think is perfect for this book. And Vietnam and the current environment have so many things in common. You know, warring Congresses, generation gaps, all kinds of things. The parallels are almost perfect.
It's that life cycle.
There's some really odd things that happen, and it's depressing on a lot of fronts when you feel that you have absolutely no control over anything that happens. You know, now we know that we can vote, and we hope that the vote doesn't get messed up. And we know, you know, but when there's just a small group of people making huge decisions for everybody else, I always kind of wish we had a different system where we didn't have to vote for somebody to go and vote and represent us. I'd like to represent myself. Thank you very much.
I know.
I mean, because when you look at the people that you vote for, hoping that whatever they said they're going to do, if you vote for them, they'd actually do, which I find to be interesting because it rarely happens. You know, there's a feeling of desperation, and then on top of it, you know, to be told, oh, guess what? We're sending you off the beginning of your life, so you can go to war in a war nobody wants or understands.
Well, and two other layers that make that worse is that the people that were going to Vietnam were not even old enough to vote.
Exactly.
The voting age was 21.
That should
and
be against
it's,
the law.
you know what, the closest parallel is actually like on, you know, the Never Again kids with the school movement is that, you know, here they are being shot and they don't have a vote, and the government's let them down with legislation. Their parents haven't fought that enough, and they have no power at all. So it's very similar to what we did in the anti-war movement. And it's what you're talking about. So frustration leads to activism. Activism can be positive, and if no one listens, it can end up being extremely destructive. And back in the time frame of Vietnam, it did both.
Yes.
And a lot of the decisions that were made in those days, that's another theme of the book, is that, you know, the kids that are in this book are teenagers, and they make decisions based upon what they know about being big man on campus, right? And it's not always the right decision, which is why, you know, when you got towards the end of the book, you could tell that a lot of these factions had started warring against each other instead of working together. And that's exactly what happens with Congress. So there's the parallels of what you see in the 14th of September and what were happening in the world then and what were happening in the world now are very, very specific. And they're seen through the eyes of a young 19-year-old girl. And that is what I'm hoping that readers will empathize with and put themselves in her shoes and say, if I were Judy and I knew what she knew, what would I do? What would I do? How courageous would I be? How cautious would I be? How, and that's, to your point earlier, that's the coming of conscience that we should all be doing about all kinds of things that are going on.
Well, I like that too, because Nancy and I are ambassadors for what's called the 8 Keys of Excellence. It's a character education program. It's a free program created by Bobby DePorter. She's our education expert, and she runs Super Camp, the world's leader in summer academic achievement programs, where they basically teach kids how to build their character using the 8 Keys of Excellence, and also teach kids how to make decisions and thinking, critical thinking and teamwork. But the very first key of excellence is integrity. And without the integrity, the other keys of excellence don't work. Integrity goes hand in hand. And, we talk about there's a gray area where you can put yourself on both sides. But when it comes to integrity, your decision is either right or it's wrong. There's no in between on that.
Yeah, and there are, and I think what I'm trying to do in this book too is to proffer the fact that there are some pretty legitimate gray areas. I mean, Pete and the mother and Maggie sort of represent one side, and then all of these counterculture people represent the other side. And they can all make really good arguments. And I actually think it's not, the arguments are not always really clear, but Judy does keep going through this dark night of the soul and says, keeps asking people, and she keeps looking for advice about what to do. And then finally she just says, I don't need any more walks around the lagoon. I don't need any more conversations with people. It's up to me, but it's got to be her. It's when she finally decides what she's going to do, she needs, it has to be her decision, and she's got to have weighed everything through. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do there. But you know what? This makes it all sound like such a heavy book.
I know that. I wanted to bring the other.
And it really wasn't, was it?
Here's the cool cycle. Here's the cool cycle of it all. When stuff is going down in the world and in the country, the musicians and the artists stand up, and the writers, the poets, and they tell the times. The art does, and Joan Baez, right? My favorite quote is the antidote to action. I mean, the antidote to despair is action. So you've got your activism in that, and a lot of musicians did. Well, she was awesome with what she did, but I find that now the music. We do a lot of musician interviews and artist interviews, and what we're seeing is like we're going back to the early 70s, late 60s. There are protest songs again. There are protests. There are protests, obviously, and marches. But I hear them, and it's on either side too. There's people are speaking out in music, and it's just really interesting because there's also some of the musicians that are still doing it. And Neil Young, and we are all familiar and enjoy Neil Young, and he's still doing it. He hasn't quit.
And he's probably still singing Ohio in his encores. Well, I think music is really interesting, and the way that I think about that in those times is that think about it when you're an early teenager. Most of the music is I lost my love, or I'm madly in love with this boy and he's not paying attention to me, or I'm crazy about her. Music has teenage music has a lot to do with love and relationships and things. And I remember in those years how it started to shift into things that were progressively more serious and political. And in the book, I hope that comes across. I also, talk about the actual sound of the music that changes. It's not light anymore. It's this come together, and it's I want you, and boom, boom, boom. And it seems to resonate that the times, suddenly this deep bass comes in, right? And this metallic background, because the times and the stories are just so much more profound. And then they could get lighter again. And it's always mixed up. Like you said, today's music is starting to get political in some ways, but every time I get into my car at a certain time, there is an endless song on this week about how somebody's going, I want to kiss a girl, I want to kiss a girl, over and over again.
That's regular radio poppy stuff. I think
still
it's
there.
Really the independent musicians now, and a lot of them will, have a career and then dedicate their craft so they can do exactly what they want and not be told by some label to, everybody needs to chew gum to your music. And to me, it's really interesting because the guitar side and the bass and even the drums, it's like, I think musicians now also have the ability to have this entire massive library of rock and roll and, folk music and country music and blues that they didn't have, 30, 40 years ago. Now it's like, wow, we have all of this to work with and learn from. And they're doing that. But I hear a lot of music when they come on, it's not necessarily always political, but it is the vibe of the times.
It's heavier.
And funkier.
And remember too, when you're young, you feel like the music is speaking just to you, right? And that the lyrics are just designed for you. Just like when you're in college and you read a novel and you go into your history class and they talk about some concept and you just go, oh my God, that's so brilliant. Why aren't we all doing this? Which is the idea of a university and what you learn in a balanced education and things. But music is extremely important. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, since you've read the book, is how did you feel about the bonding of all of these kids? It was like Judy goes from her old friends into a whole bunch of new friends, and it's that whole peace love stuff. And did you buy it? Did you experience it? Tell me how you felt when you were reading that.
It reminded me of kids I knew in school. And I'm like, oh, it's that group. I remember them.
Yeah.
And the clique, for sure. And if you went from one group and then tried to go into another just to check it out, or if you decided to be friends with somebody that one of your current friends didn't like, you took a risk.
And as I say in the book, and if you were not Black and you sat at the Black table, or vice versa. It was very divisive. And one of the things I was trying to get across in the book is that because they're teenagers, which is, I think we always have to remember that. That's why there's this huge coming of age thing in it, and we've all been through it. And your coming of conscience sort of mirrors that as you get a little bit older. But I wanted to depict that at any one time, and that decided, that the fact that one of your friends could go off and get killed in Vietnam, and would you or would you not lose your virginity that night to your boyfriend would have equal weight. Because that's how kids are. It's like, oh.
Everything is so important.
Well, and equally important. It's just, it's like, will I take these drugs, or is that fun, or, oh my God, should I lose my virginity because everyone's doing free love, or should I not do that? And oh my God, yes, Will just got his lottery number. All of that confusion I wanted to get in there as well, because just growing up is hard, right? Growing up in the passage of life is hard. And then you put what are essentially children into a circumstance where they have to deal with things beyond their comprehension, like a war and death. And then it mixes all up.
Think about it. And you have no choice. And so the choices that you do have are probably not going to be the right ones, because you're pushed to do something.
Exactly.
And I think especially with a teenage mind, you really are pushed into places, that you're going to make decisions because you feel I gotta do something, and I think that comes through. I really do. I could just almost see different kids that I knew in your book and go, oh, that's so-and-so and that's so-and-so. I like the characters a lot.
Yeah. wine time conversations was all like, do you know this happened at this point? So I think you for folks like Nancy who went to school in that era, whether it's college or high school, I think this kind of book brings people back into their childhood. They're growing their own coming of age story, coming back. Because it was interesting hearing your stories, because Nancy and I know each other pretty well, and I thought I knew all her stories, but apparently not. There's skeletons that came out.
Well, and one of the things that I think is very interesting is that as I have written this story over so many years, I ran into a lot of obstacles. People saying, why would you want to write about Vietnam? It's not relevant. We didn't win. It's bad. We did a horrible thing. We don't care about it, blah, 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 blah. Until recently, with the change in the world situation and Ken Burns' documentary, and now we're in the zeitgeist again. But it was still kind of a fraught topic. And then even recently, somebody who's extremely well-read that I know very well, who's actually co-hosting one of my book launches, said she read the book, but she said, I just can't really relate to it because that wasn't what my childhood was like. And what I said to her was, well, really, is that how you come to it? Because you don't have to have gone through it to relate to what is essentially a historical fiction book. And I said, well, what about The Interpreter of Maladies? That was about an Indian immigrant who came to the United States. Did you like that? And she goes, oh yeah, I loved it. I said, but you're not an Indian immigrant. And she goes, yep, that's exactly the point. I get it. Which is, with most historical fiction, what you do is you completely enter into the world of the book. Now, you can bring in things that resonate with you, but it shouldn't be that if you didn't have an experience of that time frame, you wouldn't be interested.
Well, no,
and
because nobody
it's
would
funny
read historic novels.
And that's my point, that a lot of people are like, well, I wasn't around then, so it's not interesting. It's like, read it like it's historical fiction, and that's why I think it's a very good book for young adults.
Yeah, I was going to say for young teenagers and women, to read things like this. And I think that we should, that's like saying I'm not going to watch Ken Burns, and everyone should watch absolutely everything that Ken Burns has ever done, and watch the Eleanor Roosevelt one too. And all the national park ones. Sorry. He's one of the, and Lewis and Clark. And if you don't go back in the history, you're not going to understand the present. And you're not going to handle the future as well, because it's also like how people do forget what's going on in the past. Like they say, don't look back. Well, there's lessons in there, and that's the importance. And I think it's important. Historical novels like yours is that your characters sell the story. Judy's important because then people can identify with her. Oh, maybe I should have done this better in my life, or even dealing with it now. I think that it's important. I think that's what the strength of historical fiction is, one of the most important genres of writing than ever, because it's telling
it
lessons.
serves as a warning. Like, when I read your book and I look at our current situation right now, I feel like we just went right back to where we were before.
Yeah,
I call it the hamster wheel of history.
Yeah, that's perfect. I like that.
Did we not learn anything?
Well, did you? I want to know from you, when you were writing this and doing the research, I know that this is connected to your timeline of life too. Did you learn things in your research that you may have thought it was this way and then went, oh, it was actually that way?
Well, I did in specifics. I mean, one of the problems is, of course, we all think our memories are infallible. And then you actually go and check it out and you go, oh, that actually happened later or before or around. So it was smaller things like that. What I did realize is what you had said earlier in the interview, which is people look at this time, as I think they probably do any time that's really fraught in history, with their own point of view. So it's very fragmented. Your experience, if you had been in school in 68 versus 69 was completely different. 69 versus 70 was different. 70 versus 71. If you had been in a East Coast Ivy League college or a state university. You know, if you had people with means or people without means, all of those different things would come into this. And the most astounding thing I found, not astounding, it was actually kind of like ice water in my face, is that I definitely felt like the women that were on my campus and that I interacted with were, even though they were running things, that they were disenfranchised. You know, like I said, at any moment, a guy could turn around and go, what difference does it make? You don't have to go. You're not going to die, blah, blah, blah. And yet when that came out, and I did an article on this in Ms. Magazine, there were a lot of other people that just came out of the woods and said, under no circumstances where we were completely accepted as people that were running this. And, you know, we didn't have any problems at all. So I kind of came down thinking that in many different places, women may not have felt the way that they do in this book. However, in quite a few, the sexism at the time, and remember this was early feminism, really did hamper a lot of people from doing what they, you know, getting as involved in being as enfranchised as they were. I mean, there were times when, for example, Jane Fonda was the big anti-war person, right? And so you'd get involved in the anti-war thing, and, you know, there was a famous thing, and I really love Jane Fonda, but there was this famous picture of her in a big rally where she was wearing a tube top and really tight jeans and platform heels, you know, and a lot of the other people are in fatigue jackets and all this stuff. And so here's all the guys in the anti-war thing thinking, well, why can't you wear a tube top? You know, like, why don't you do that? So you're still males and females, and you're still doing this. And sexism was not, feminism was not as refined as it is today. It was still in the early stages. There was a lot of bravado about it, but it wasn't as refined. It was very polarizing and confusing. It was very confusing.
I remember in the last year of high school, the scholarships to go to college were all, if you were a woman, it was to be a nurse.
Yeah,
well, that's what mine was. Yeah, your choices. My mother, who would have been, I think, 102 now. She did go to World War II, but she said, I just love this. She was the daughter of Danish immigrants, and she said, my choices in life were to marry a farmer and stay on the farm, become a teacher, marry a farmer and stay on the farm, or become a nurse and get off the farm. I became a nurse. Yeah. You know, because she didn't want to stay on the farm. And then she said to us later, and I had a sister as well, and she said, I thought your choices would be so much broader. And even though they are, I'm disappointed that they aren't as free as I thought they would be by this time in the world.
Exactly. You know? World War II, this is what is very interesting about, you know, when the war ended and you look at what the women just even in this country did, you know, Rosie the Riveter and so many changes happened here for women. It was a time where women shone and said, hey, you know, we can do things that men do. We can get down and dirty. We can play engineers. We can get in a production line. We can do things. And then the war ended. And then here comes the era of, you know, martinis and music and naughtiness and shenanigans. And everybody had this, you know, free, like, woohoo, it's over. So I think when Vietnam happened, that is part of that shock theory, or not theory, but thing that happened was, I think that World War II was supposed to be the last kind of thing like this. And for it to have just been like, okay, that's it. We're taking your young. They can't vote, but we're taking your young anyway. And that was a shocking thing. And the role for women was different than the role for women with World War II. It's crazy. And it's because of that age group, I think, too, that you're talking about for Judy in your book is, this is that's the time you're supposed to go backpacking in Europe or go to college or, you know, something, you know, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. But no, now it's changed. So
well, I think part of that too was the time. We were, my generation was raised actually as the first one to even consider doing something that was your passion as opposed to, you know, put food on the table and raise your family. Because, you know, they came back after World War II and they just wanted things to be normal. you know.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, we just went through this war, things to be normal. And of course, lots of things went on then, but ours was, you know, you were thinking about your passion, but actually the world itself wasn't quite set up for you to do that. Just like women went to World War II, they could learn to do things, or they would cover at home and they would have great skills, and then they had to revert all those jobs back to the men. The world wasn't ready for that yet. And, you know, after, you know, this kind of thing, it was just sort of like, yes, the feminism is sort of coming out of this things, but the world has to catch up to it, you know. And the world
I remember
now,
my grandmother being so excited because she could wear pants. She got herself these polyester pantsuits and stuff, and she said because she was the driver in my grandparents' family. My grandfather worked at a newspaper, was partially deaf, so he didn't drive. So she did the driving, and she said putting the groceries in the back of the car in a skirt just wasn't for her. And so as soon as she could buy pants, that was it.
Yeah.
Big deal to be, as a woman, to wear pants.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's just interesting how these innovations, the world isn't always ready for the innovations. You can tell that just about all the Me Too stuff, right? We can all get into business and do this, but look what's happened, you know.
Exactly.
So you know, the circumstances lag. I'm sure anyone of any diverse background would say, no kidding, you know.
I know.
We've got these rights, but then you've got to live in the world the way it is, and there's a lag. I'm sure there's probably all kinds of studies out there that says it takes you 50 years to catch up to social innovations once they're made. But that's why that Vietnam period, I think, or the 60s period, the late 60s, whatever it was, are so interesting because so many things came out of that. People wanting to change the world. They were going to go after their passion. Women were getting empowered. That's not a word we used in those days. All of these social changes are coming. But then we had a war on top of it. And then, you know, 68 was it was like a worldwide change that went through. But then the country has to settle down a little bit and absorb all this, you know, and we're still absorbing it all. And some people didn't want to stick around and wait for it. You know, my theory is the me generation was a lot of people of my generation who we tried to change the world and we failed. So we're just going to focus on ourselves here for a while. But anybody who went through that time, you know, was going to come back and still try and change the world after you'd raised your family and done all these different things. And then 9/11 happens, you know, and it's like a big bushwhack. Oh, the world is scary again. Gee, you know. The cycles
I think I've always known the world to be scary. I've lived in different countries, and
if you lived in South Africa, you have it's
Kenya, England, South Africa, and Mexico. And
were your parents diplomats or teachers?
Well, this is Lisa. It's Nancy who took me around as a kid. She, as a single woman, I should say when she split with my father. So she took me to Kenya when I was a year and a half, and she went to work with Joy Adamson in the bush with her lions and. Oh my
goodness!
So that's
Lisa, you were so intrepid and courageous.
Well, here's a good thing. Well, first thing I found out when I went to live in Kenya is I could not, as a single white woman, open a bank account. That was a real whoopsie.
Yeah.
So I had to go out on the street and get a man to come in and stand beside me and pretend to be my husband.
That really sounds bad, Nancy. I know.
That should be a scene.
I walked out of the bank. I went out and I saw a white guy, which turned out to be a lawyer, which was a good choice on mine because you could go for 3 or 4 days at that time and never see a white person. So he was walking down the street. I was like, "Excuse me, sir. I'm trying to open a bank account." And so he went and stood there and helped me open the bank account.
You guys became friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, then he tipped his hat and you never saw him again, huh? But
no, in fact, I ended up working for him for a while.
Yeah. It was an interesting time frame of life. And
being a second-class person as a female in Africa is vastly different to being a second-class citizen here.
You know, I find the stories of women to be infinitely interesting for all the reasons we've talked about for this past 40 minutes or so, because in every generation, in every circumstance, in every country, and every whatever, the obstacles change and yet don't. You know, they're loosey, they're fluid. You know, you know, they go this way and then they kind of dip back and they do all these different things. So that is why, you know, again, I think it's time for a woman's story of Vietnam. So we're talking about the woman's side of a story that we think we know really well. And this story has no helicopters and no jungles and no mud and no atrocities.
And a different kind of purple
very
haze.
Definitely, yes. I'm sorry.
I'm excited because I get to read it now, and everyone, the 14th of September is out today. Now go get it. Again, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all those great places. But go to Rita's website, author-rita-dragonette.com, and connect with her on social media. But before you go, I have two questions. One is, do you want to see this be a documentary? Like, would you let Ken Burns take the 14th of September, and not like a documentary, but follow the life of Judy and do a PBS special?
Oh, in a second.
Okay.
In a second, and Jane Fonda would be in it.
Okay, there you go.
Not playing Judy, but she would have a part in it. Yes, it's so rich, and there are so many stories to tell. Absolutely.
Exactly.
From your mouth to God's ears, right?
Yeah, and then let it keep going, and we hope you keep writing too. Okay, you're going to have a dinner party. It could be one of your literary salons, but you're going to have a party, and you're going to invite 3 people. They could be alive, passed on. It could be fictional. Who are the 3 people at the table?
Well, I would definitely invite Ernest Hemingway.
Cool.
For his style. Somebody had to ask me to explain my style once, and I said Hemingway with flesh. I would say Ernest Hemingway, Virginia Woolf.
Oh, cool.
Who was so incredibly radical. What?
What's that? What was it? Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Yeah.
And then was it Liz Taylor? And she.
Although she did write very radical books. And a third person. I don't know. A third person. I'm trying to think of. I feel like there's all these like amazing women that I would want to put my electrodes into their head, and I'm blanking on it.
I like Ernest Hemingway.
Well, you know, actually, I think I do know who it is. I just can't think of what her name is. Who was the? She was from Texas. She died several years ago. Kirkpatrick, was that her name? Jean Kirkpatrick. She was a politician. I'm not sure she held office, but she was sort of like Madeleine Albright about a decade earlier. And I think it was Jean Kirkpatrick. I think her name was something like that. And when she talked, you just wanted to put her at the center of the universe because she was a voice of reason amid all kinds of different points of view. And if we had that point of view, regardless of whatever you were talking about, even if Ernest Hemingway was talking about misogyny, she would probably even that conversation out and make us all feel like, whoa, we hadn't thought of it that way before. So that's who I'd have.
Okay. I'm looking, I see if I do anything Kirkpatrick here, I'm going to get, I keep getting Alice Glass, but
I think it was Jean Kirkpatrick. I can see her face, and I'm so sorry for having a senior moment here. And not remembering what it is. I'll look it up and let you know.
Yeah, because I keep getting out for in Texas. She was a close friend and political supporter of Lyndon Johnson. Alice Glass Kirkpatrick. She was 1911 to 1976.
Yeah, so, I think this one was alive longer than that.
Oh, okay. This can be but we're in Kirkpatrick country here in Arizona, so that's
okay.
That's next thing you know, if I type anything on that, here she pops up. Yeah. Okay, so we've got a special song to air for you. And before you go, I want to say thank you to listeners for joining us. Big Blend Radio airs Sunday through Friday, and you can go to bigblendradio.com for the upcoming schedule. You can listen to our shows as they air, or you can listen anytime on demand. All the links are there. And we do want to give a big thank you to our sponsor, which is FamilyHistoryExpos.com. Miss Holly T. Holly T. Hansen is the Gen teacher, and she helps everyone find their family history, trace their family roots. There's all kinds of online classes, expos, all kinds of books. I mean, even we were talking about military history, even books and classes on how to research your family's military history, and also family history around the world from Africa to the British Isles. So just go check out familyhistoryexpos.com. And we have a special song for you, Rita. This is My Turn Begins Today. It is from LisaDawnMiller.com is the website, but it's Lisa Dawn Miller. And this is the title track to her EP of when she said, you know, it's my turn now. I'm going to do my music my way. And that's that. She's really cool. She is the daughter of Ron Miller, and also her and her husband Sandy Hackett is the son of Buddy Hackett, and together they tour the country with Sandy Hackett's Rat Pack. So watch for them, but you can find all that on LisaDawnMiller.com. Again, everyone, the book is the-14th-of-September. It's by Rita Dragonette. You can get it on Amazon, all those great places, but just go to ritadragonette.com. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure.
This was delightful.
Thank you. All right. You take care and keep us posted on Ken Burns.
We'll do that. Okay.
Okay, cool. Here it is, everyone. My turn begins today.
I can see the sun is shining somewhere in tomorrow. There's a place for me somehow. I can hear the wind defining, whispering the answer to me now. And I vow and need to say, my turn begins today. It's time to fly and find a better way. I know I have to say goodbye to yesterday. Just watch me fly. It's gonna be my way. It's time, my turn begins today. The road has gotten long. It's taken time to find what I've been searching for. And now I know a place where I belong that I call mine. Although I've made it, there's much more. Open the door. It's gonna be my way. My turn begins today. It's time to fly and find a better way. I know I have to say goodbye to yesterday. Just watch me fly. It's gonna be my way. Turn